a dimly lit Manhattan restaurant, a spilled glass of vintage Barolo, and a whispered phrase in a forgotten Tuscan dialect that stopped the most dangerous apex predator in New York dead in his tracks. When 22-year-old waitstaff Natalie accidentally charmed a terrifyingly elegant older woman, she didn't know she was speaking to the ruthless matriarch of an immortal syndicate, and she definitely didn't realize the lethal, breathtaking man watching her from the shadows had just decided she was his. The rain in Manhattan fell in sheets, slicking the cobblestones of Greenwich Street and reflecting the dim amber glow of L'Osteria Vecchia. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The restaurant was an exclusive enclave for Wall Street billionaires, foreign dignitaries, and the kind of old money that didn't just buy yachts, but bought governments. Yet tonight, the usual arrogant chatter was subdued into nervous murmurs. The Moretti family had taken the corner booth. Natalie balanced a silver tray of antipasti on her fingertips. Her black uniform perfectly pressed, but clinging slightly to her damp skin. She was exhausted, pushing through hour 14 of a double shift to cover her younger brother Leo's mounting debts. She didn't have time to be intimidated by the city's elite, but the Morettis were different. There were only two of them at the table, a mother and a son. The mother, Caterina, sat with the rigid, terrifying grace of a deposed queen. Her silver hair was pinned up in an immaculate twist, and a diamond choker rested against skin that looked unnaturally pale, almost luminous in the candlelight. Across from her sat Dominic. Dominic Moretti was a rumor made flesh. He controlled a labyrinthine empire of real estate and private equity, but the whispers in the city's underground claimed his true currency was fear. He wore a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that clung to a brutally powerful frame. His face was sculpted with aristocratic cruelty, high cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes so dark they seemed to swallow the ambient light. He hadn't touched his food. He was just staring at the door, completely motionless. Not even his chest seemed to rise or fall. Table 4, Paul the maitre d' hissed, shoving a bottle of 1982 Barolo into Natalie's hands. His hands were shaking. "I can't go back over there." The old woman looked at me, and I swear I felt my blood turn to ice. "You pour it, Nat. You're invisible." "I'm not getting fired because you're having a panic attack, Paul," Natalie whispered back, but she took the velvet-wrapped bottle anyway. She retrieved a clean cloth and stepped into the suffocating aura of the Moretti booth. As she approached, the temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Caterina was speaking in Italian, but it wasn't the standard dialect taught in schools. It was a rhythmic, archaic Tuscan, rough around the edges and heavy with centuries of sorrow. Natalie recognized it instantly. It was the exact dialect her late grandmother Rosa used to speak when she thought she was completely alone. "Questo mondo non ha memoria. Hanno dimenticato il sapore della vera devozione," Caterina murmured coldly, staring at the candle. "This world has no memory. They have forgotten the taste of true devotion." Natalie stepped up to the table, uncorking the wine with practiced, silent efficiency. "Good evening," she murmured, tipping the bottle to pour a measure into Caterina's crystal glass. Suddenly, a thunderous crash of thunder outside startled the dining room. A busboy near the kitchen dropped a stack of plates. The sudden noise made Natalie flinch. A single dark red drop of the Barolo splashed onto the stark white tablecloth dangerously close to Caterina's silk cuff. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic's gaze snapped from the door to Natalie. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and for a terrifying second, Natalie felt like a deer caught in the sights of a sniper rifle. His pupils were dilated, completely black, and a low, almost imperceptible vibration resonated from his chest. Caterina looked at the red stain, then slowly up at Natalie. Her eyes were ancient and furious. "Incompetent!" she hissed in English. Then, switching back to her obscure Tuscan dialect, she muttered, "You children run around like frightened mice. In my day, a mistake like this would cost a servant their hand." She didn't expect the waitress to understand. She certainly didn't expect the waitress to answer. Natalie didn't flinch. She remembered her grandmother's fiery pride. With a gentle, apologetic smile, she picked up her white cloth and blotted the spilled wine. Without missing a beat, she replied in flawless, archaic Tuscan, "E ai tuoi tempi, signora, il vino era troppo amaro per essere pianto. Ti chiedo perdono. And in your day, madam, the wine was too bitter to weep over. I ask your forgiveness." Caterina froze. The imperious mask slipped, revealing a flash of absolute shock. She stared at Natalie as if looking at a ghost. Where did you learn that tongue, child? She breathed, the anger evaporating, replaced by a sudden aching vulnerability. My mother used to say those exact words when the harvest failed in Siena, hundreds of years. I have not heard that phrase in— She cut herself off, her cold eyes suddenly shining with unshed emotion. Natalie's expression softened her empathy, overriding her professionalism. She gently poured the rest of the wine. Le madri lasciano ecchi che il tempo non può cancellare, Natalie whispered back warmly. Mothers leave echoes that time cannot erase. She placed the bottle down and looked at the formidable matriarch. You just stole my heart, Signora. My grandmother spoke just like you. The air in the room didn't just chill, it stopped completely. Dominic Moretti went utterly rigid. The glass in his hand shattered the crystal, turning to dust under his sudden, involuntary grip. Blood-red wine dripped from his pale fingers onto the floor. Natalie gasped, immediately reaching out. Sir, I'll get a towel. Do not touch me, Dominic commanded. His voice was a silken rasp, an agonizingly beautiful sound that sent a jolt of pure electricity down Natalie's spine. He wasn't looking at his bleeding hand. He was looking at her, the way a starving man looks at a feast, the way a king looks at a crown he thought lost forever. He could hear the erratic, bird-like fluttering of her pulse. He could smell the subtle scent of vanilla rain and the intoxicating, impossible rush of her blood. But what paralyzed him was the fact that for the first time in 500 years, the dead, hollow cavity in his chest had twitched. Katerina leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory, and deeply satisfied smile spreading across her lips. She didn't look at the spilled wine. She looked from her son to the fragile human girl. What is your name, little bird? Katerina asked softly. Natalie, ma'am? Natalie, Dominic repeated. The name sounded like a vow on his lips. He finally broke eye contact, standing up with predatory fluidity. He dropped a heavy stack of $100 bills onto the table, far more than the cost of the meal or the broken glass. We are leaving, Mother. As they swept out of the restaurant, casting long, unnatural shadows, Natalie pressed her hand against her own chest. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, and she couldn't shake the terrifying, thrilling sensation that her life had just ended and something entirely new had just begun. The obsession began quietly. For the next 2 weeks, the shadows in Natalie's life seemed to lengthen. It started with the subtle things. The broken heater in her dilapidated Astoria apartment suddenly roared to life, fixed by an anonymous contractor who claimed the landlord had paid for a premium upgrade. The harassing phone calls from the debt collectors hounding her brother Leo abruptly ceased. And then there was the restaurant. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, precisely at 9 o'clock, Dominic Moretti walked into l'Osteria Vecchia. He never brought his terrifying mother. He came alone. He always sat at table 4, refusing service from anyone but Natalie. He terrified her. He fascinated her. You're not eating, Natalie observed one rainy Thursday evening, clearing away a plate of rare filet mignon that had barely been touched. Dominic sat back, his dark eyes tracking her every movement. He was impossibly still. It was one of the things that unnerved her the most. He didn't fidget. He didn't blink when he shouldn't. He didn't breathe with the normal rhythm of a human being. I find my appetite lies elsewhere, he said, his voice a low hum that bypassed her ears and vibrated directly in her bones. At $600 a plate, Mr. Moretti, you should probably try a bite, she joked nervously, trying to break the heavy tension. Dominic, he corrected smoothly. And I didn't come here for the food, Natalie. I came to watch you. She froze the dirty plate in her hand, suddenly feeling very heavy. That's a very bold thing to say to a waitress trying to do her job. I am not a man who hides his intentions, Dominic replied, leaning slightly forward. The ambient light of the restaurant seemed to bend around him, plunging his corner into deeper shadow. I know about your brother Leo. I know he owes $60,000 to a human parasite named Mickey the Razor Sullivan. I know you work 70 hours a week to keep Mickey from breaking Leo's legs. Natalie felt the blood drain from her face. Her voice dropped to a fierce, protective whisper. Have you been investigating me? Who do you think you are? I am the man who can make all of it go away with a single phone call, Dominic stated. He reached out his long, pale fingers, gently brushing the side of her wrist. The contact was electric. His skin was freezing like polished marble left out in the winter snow, yet the touch sent a wave of searing heat straight to her core. She gasped, pulling her hand back as if burned. Why? Natalie Natalie demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and an inexplicable magnetic pull. Why would you do that? Rich men don't do favors for waitresses unless they want something in return. Dominic's eyes darkened, the black of his pupils expanding to swallow the irises. I want many things from you, Natalie, but I do not buy loyalty. I command it, or I earn it. Consider the debt erased, a gift for speaking to my mother with such kindness. He stood up, towering over her. He moved with a supernatural grace that made the rest of the patrons look like stumbling toddlers. He leaned in his lips, brushing the shell of her ear. She stopped breathing. She could feel the unnatural chill radiating from him, smell the intoxicating scent of ancient petrichor and bergamot. Be careful walking home tonight, little bird, he whispered into the dark hair at the nape of her neck. The city is full of monsters. When Natalie finished her shift at 2 a.m., the streets of Manhattan were slick with freezing rain. She took the N train back to Queens, her mind racing. Dominic Moretti wasn't just a billionaire. There was something deeply structurally wrong with him. The cold skin, the impossible stillness, the way Paul, the maître d', trembled just looking at the man's coat. She walked the final 4 blocks to her apartment, pulling her coat tight against the biting wind. The streetlights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows against the brick facades. As she turned into the narrow alleyway behind her building, a shortcut she took every night she stopped dead. 3 men blocked her path. At the center was Mickey Sullivan. He was a brute of a man with a scarred face and a heavy iron pipe tapping rhythmically against his palm. Hello, Natalie, Mickey growled, spitting a toothpick onto the wet asphalt. Your brother missed his payment today. Said some fancy guy in a suit told him the debt was cleared. Mickey laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I don't work for fancy guys in suits. I want my money, sweetheart. And since Leo ain't got it, we're gonna take it out of your hide. Natalie backed up, reaching into her purse for the pepper spray she always carried, but 2 more men stepped out from the shadows behind her, blocking her exit. She was trapped. Please, Natalie said, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking in her veins. I can get you 5,000 by tomorrow. Don't do this. Mickey lunged forward, grabbing her roughly by the lapels of her coat and slamming her against the damp brick wall. The breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. I don't want 5 grand. I want... Mickey never finished his sentence. From the darkness above, something dropped. It didn't fall with a heavy thud. It landed with the silent, lethal grace of a panther. The air pressure in the alley suddenly dropped. The temperature plummeted so fast Natalie could see her own breath pluming in the air. Dominic Moretti stood 10 feet away. He wasn't wearing an overcoat, just his impeccably tailored suit, immune to the freezing rain. His face was a mask of absolute terrifying wrath. Take your hands off what is mine, Dominic's voice echoed. It didn't sound human anymore. It sounded like grinding tectonic plates, dark and ancient. Mickey let go of Natalie, spinning around with his iron pipe raised. Who the hell are you? Get out of here before I break your... Dominic moved. Natalie didn't see him step forward. 1 second he was 10 feet away, and the next he was standing directly in front of Mickey. Dominic's hand shot out, wrapping around Mickey's thick throat. With a sickeningly casual flick of his wrist, Dominic lifted the 250-pound man off the ground with one arm. Mickey dropped the pipe. It clattered loudly against the pavement. The loan shark kicked his legs, his face turning a mottled purple as he clawed desperately at Dominic's pale, immovable fingers. The other 4 men shouted, pulling switchblades and handguns from their jackets. Run, Dominic commanded Natalie, not looking back at her. She couldn't. Her legs refused to obey. She watched in paralyzing horror as the first thug lunged with a knife. Dominic didn't even turn his head. He casually tossed Mickey aside like a broken rag doll. Mickey hit the dumpster with a bone-shattering crunch and didn't move. The thug thrust the blade at Dominic's chest. Dominic caught the man's wrist. There was a sharp, wet snap, and the thug screamed in agony as his arm bent entirely backward. Dominic moved with blinding speed, a blur of charcoal wool and lethal force. He struck the second man in the chest with an open palm. The impact sounded like a car crash. The man flew backward, flying a full 20 feet before slamming into a brick wall and slumping to the ground unconscious. The third man raised a gun, his hands shaking violently. Monster, what are you? He shrieked, pulling the trigger. Bang! The bullet struck Dominic squarely in the shoulder. Natalie screamed. Dominic stopped. He slowly looked down at the ruined fabric of his expensive Brioni suit jacket. A small puncture hole smoked lightly. There was no blood, He looked up, and for the first time Natalie saw his true face. The illusion of humanity had shattered. His jaw unhinged slightly, revealing two elongated razor-sharp fangs that gleamed in the dim streetlight. His eyes weren't just dark anymore. They burned with a terrifying blood-red luminescence. Veins pulsed dark and visible beneath his porcelain skin. He let out a sound, a terrifying predatory hiss that echoed off the brick walls and triggered every primal survival instinct in Natalie's brain. The man with the gun dropped his weapon and ran screaming into the night. The others who were conscious scrambled after him, leaving their weapons and dignity behind, desperate to escape the apex predator they had just awakened. Silence rushed back into the alley, save for the patter of the rain and the groans of the broken men on the ground. Dominic stood still, his back to Natalie. His shoulders rose and fell heavily as he fought to suppress the violent, bloodthirsty beast raging beneath his skin. He slowly reached up and adjusted his cuffs. When he turned back to her, the red glow had faded from his eyes. His fangs were retracted. He looked like the aloof billionaire once more, save for the bullet hole in his jacket. Natalie was pressed flat against the brick wall, trembling violently. She couldn't breathe. Her mind was shattering, trying to reconcile the impossibility of what she had just witnessed. You're not, she stammered, sliding down the wall until she hit the wet pavement. Dominic was beside her in an instant. He crouched down, moving slowly so as not to spook her further. He didn't touch her, but he hovered close, his icy presence wrapping around her like a blanket. I am exactly what you think I am, Dominic said softly, his voice returning to that hypnotic velvety timbre. I am a monster, Natalie, but I am not here to hurt you. I came to protect you. Why? She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Why me? I'm just a waitress. I'm nobody. You are not a nobody, Dominic murmured fiercely. Look at me. She slowly lowered her hands, meeting his dark, endless gaze. When you spoke to my mother in the restaurant, Dominic explained, his eyes tracing the delicate lines of her frightened face. You spoke a dialect of Tuscan that died out in the 15th century. It was the dialect of Volterra, the village where I was born as a human. Natalie stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. That's my grandmother's language. Your grandmother, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper, was a descendant of the Corelli bloodline. 500 years ago, a Corelli saved my mother from the stake. They sheltered us when the mortal church hunted us down. Our family made a blood pact to protect the Corelli line until the end of time. We thought the line had died out in the war. We have been searching for your family for 80 years. He slowly extended his hand, palm up. It was an offering, a choice. My mother wishes to see you, Natalie, not as a servant, but as an honored guest of the Moretti Syndicate. Your life of struggling in the dirt ends tonight. Natalie looked at his pale, perfectly smooth hand. She thought of her mounting bills, her brother's addiction, the crushing weight of her human life. She looked at the broken bodies of the men who had tormented her, realizing that Dominic had neutralized them without a second thought. He was terrifying. He was a creature of nightmare. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw a desperate, centuries-old loneliness that mirrored her own. With a trembling hand, Natalie reached out and placed her fingers in his. His grip was incredibly gentle, like he was holding a priceless artifact of blown glass. He pulled her effortlessly to her feet. Come with me, he whispered. A sleek black Bentley appeared at the mouth of the alley, its headlights cutting through the rain. Dominic led her toward it, leaving the bloody alley behind. As the heavy car door clicked shut, Natalie knew she was crossing a threshold. She was leaving the mortal world behind, stepping into a shadow realm of ancient blood, ruthless power, and a predator king who had just claimed her heart. The drive upstate was a blur of rain-slicked highways and oppressive silence. The interior of the Bentley smelled of old leather and the faint, intoxicating bergamot scent that clung to Dominic. Natalie sat pressed against the far door, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the city lights bleed into the darkened wilderness of the Hudson Valley. Dominic remained perfectly still beside her. He did not speak, but she could feel the heavy magnetic pull of his gaze. It was a physical weight, anchoring her to the impossible reality of the night. You are shivering, Dominic noted. His voice cut through the quiet, a velvet rumble that vibrated against the windows. I just watched a man throw another man 20 feet into a brick wall. Natalie whispered, her voice barely audible, over the hum of the engine. I think I'm allowed to be a little in shock. A profound, ancient sadness flickered in Dominic's dark eyes. He slowly reached across the leather seat, lifting a heavy cashmere blanket. With agonizing slowness, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he draped it over her trembling shoulders. I did not want you to see that side of me so soon, little bird. The world I inhabit is not kind. It is built on violence and shadows. But within my walls you will never know fear. Natalie clutched the cashmere tightly. You said my family saved yours, the Corelli bloodline. What does that actually mean for me? Am I a prisoner? A pet? Dominic's jaw clenched. The air temperature in the car plummeted. Do not insult my honor, Natalie. You are the last scion of a sacred pact. In our syndicate, the blood debt is the only law that matters. You are here to be protected, elevated, and revered. My mother would burn this state to the ground before letting a single hair on your head be harmed. The car turned off the main highway, slipping onto a private winding road shrouded by ancient twisting oaks. The trees seemed to close in around them like skeletal fingers, hiding them from the mortal world. After 10 minutes of driving through the impenetrable darkness, colossal wrought-iron gates emerged from the fog. They swung open silently at their approach, revealing the Moretti estate. It was a staggering architectural marvel, part Gothic castle, part modern fortress. The mansion loomed against the stormy sky like a sleeping beast. Vast expanses of bulletproof glass were framed by weathered centuries-old stone. The structure radiated wealth, power, and an unmistakable sense of dread. The Bentley glided to a halt before sweeping stone steps. Before the driver could even shift the car into park, Dominic was out of his seat. He opened Natalie's door, offering his pale hand. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before taking it. His skin was still freezing, but the touch ignited that same terrifying, electrifying heat deep in her core. The heavy mahogany doors of the estate swung open as they approached. Inside the foyer was a cathedral of marble, lit by a massive chandelier that dripped with thousands of crystals. Standing at the base of the sweeping double staircase was Katerina. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk. In the brilliant lighting of the manor, her supernatural nature was undeniable. Her skin possessed a pearlescent, translucent quality, and her eyes held the terrifying depth of a frozen ocean. Dominic, Katerina said softly, her gaze immediately locking onto Natalie. You brought her. Mickey Sullivan's men cornered her in an alley, Dominic replied, his voice chilling the massive room. The mortal pestilence has been dealt with. Her brother's debts are permanently erased. Katerina's eyes flared with a sudden vicious crimson light before settling back to their icy blue. Foolish humans, she hissed. Then her expression softened miraculously as she stepped toward Natalie. The fearsome matriarch of the most lethal syndicate in North America reached out with trembling hands, gently cupping Natalie's face. La mia piccola salvatrice, Katerina whispered in the forgotten Tuscan dialect. My little savior. For 80 years I believed the Corelli line had been extinguished in the fires of the Second Great War. I mourned your grandmother Rosa. She was a child when I last saw her hidden in the catacombs beneath Volterra. You possess her exact eyes. You knew my grandmother? Natalie breathed, the shock momentarily overriding her fear. I held her when she was born. Katerina smiled, a rare haunting expression. Your family hid my coven when the Inquisition marched with silver and fire. You bled for us. Now we shall bleed for you. Katerina dropped her hands and stepped back, her posture returning to that of a queen. Valentina, a stunningly beautiful woman with raven hair and pale skin, stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. She moved with the same predatory grace as Dominic. Prepare the east wing for our guest, Katerina commanded. Draw a hot bath, burn the sage and lavender, bring her the silks we acquired in Milan. Our honored guest must shed the garments of her struggling mortal life. Wait, Natalie interjected, her panic rising again. My brother Leo, he doesn't know where I am. I can't just vanish into the night. Dominic stepped behind her, his imposing presence serving as a shield against her rising hysteria. I have already dispatched my men to your apartment, he said smoothly. Leo is being moved to a secure luxury penthouse in Manhattan. He will be enrolled in the finest rehabilitation center in the state tomorrow morning, fully funded by the Moretti estate. He is safe. You are safe. Natalie stared at him, overwhelmed by the casual display of absolute power. In a single hour, this terrifying, magnificent creature had dismantled every agonizing problem in her life. "Why?" she asked again, her voice breaking. Dominic looked down at her, his dark eyes stripping away her defenses. "Because you are Corelli, and because you are mine to protect." The next 3 days were a surreal, gilded fever dream. Natalie's life as a waitress carrying trays of antipasti vanished, replaced by an existence of suffocating luxury. The east wing of the Moretti estate was a sprawling suite of rooms decorated in rich emerald velvets, antique gold, and priceless Renaissance art. Valentina, the raven-haired vampire who served as her attendant and guard, catered to her every conceivable whim. Yet despite the endless flow of gourmet food prepared by human chefs who lived on the grounds and the closets filled with bespoke designer clothing, Natalie felt the invisible bars of her cage. She was not allowed to leave the East Wing without an escort. The estate was heavily guarded not by mortal security guards, but by silent, lethal immortals who watched the perimeter with glowing, hungry eyes. Dominic visited her every evening at exactly midnight. He never crossed the threshold of her bedroom, always standing in the archway of her private parlor. They would talk for hours. She learned about his human life in the 15th century, his transformation, and the crushing burden of leading the syndicate. In return, she told him about her grandmother, the struggles of raising Leo after their parents passed, and her secret dreams of opening her own bakery. With every midnight conversation, the terror she initially felt began to morph into something far more dangerous, a deep, intoxicating fascination. Dominic was a monster, but he was a monster who treated her like she was the most precious artifact on Earth. On the evening of the 4th day, Valentina entered the suite carrying a garment bag of opaque black velvet. "The master requests your presence in the grand ballroom tonight, Miss Natalie," Valentina said, her voice devoid of inflection. "The syndicate is hosting a gathering. The leaders of the 5 families will be present. You are to be formally introduced under the protection of the Moretti banner." Natalie's stomach twisted. "A gathering of vampires? Of apex predators," Valentina corrected, unzipping the bag. "Do not show fear tonight. They can smell it. If they believe you are weak, even Dominic's protection might not stop the whispers." Valentina pulled out the dress. It was a masterpiece of deep blood-red silk. It featured a plunging neckline, a corseted bodice that cinched her waist tightly, and a high slit that exposed her leg. It was daring, provocative, and entirely unlike anything Natalie had ever worn. When Valentina finished styling her hair into cascading soft waves and applying a dark, striking red lip, Natalie barely recognized the woman staring back in the gilded mirror. She looked powerful. She looked dangerous. A soft knock echoed through the suite. Dominic stood in the doorway. He wore a midnight blue velvet tuxedo that accentuated his broad shoulders and narrow waist. When his eyes landed on Natalie, he stopped breathing. His jaw tightened, and the faint crimson glow flared dangerously in his dark irises. "You look—" Dominic paused, struggling to find a word that wouldn't betray the violent possessiveness tearing through his chest. "Breathtaking." "I feel like a target," Natalie admitted, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the silk skirt. Dominic crossed the room in the blink of an eye. He stopped mere inches from her, the sheer force of his presence overwhelming her senses. He reached out gently, tilting her chin up so she was forced to look into his bottomless eyes. "Listen to me," he commanded, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. "Tonight you will see monsters older than the nation we stand in. You will see cruelty disguised as high society. But you will not flinch. You are a Corelli, and more importantly, you are on my arm. If any creature in that ballroom dares to look at you with anything less than absolute reverence, I will tear their spine from their body." He extended his arm. Natalie took a deep breath, steadying her racing heart, and looped her arm through his. The grand ballroom was a scene ripped from a dark, opulent fairy tale. Hundreds of immortals mingled under massive chandeliers, sipping from crystal flutes filled with dark, viscous liquid that Natalie tried very hard not to think about. The music was a haunting string quartet, playing a melancholy waltz. As Dominic and Natalie descended the grand staircase, the music didn't stop, but the conversation did. Every glowing, predatory eye in the room snapped to them. The collective weight of their stares was suffocating. Natalie felt the predatory hunger radiating from the crowd, a chilling wave of malice and curiosity. "Keep your chin up, little bird," Dominic whispered into her hair, his grip tightening reassuringly on her arm. They reached the floor, and the crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Katerina was holding court near a massive fireplace flanked by terrifyingly beautiful guards. She smiled approvingly as Natalie approached. "Magnificent," Katerina declared loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the silent room. "Friends, allies, and rivals, I present to you the ward of the Moretti Syndicate, Natalie Corelli. The blood debt is recognized. Her life is our life. Her enemies are our prey." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The name Corelli carried immense weight, but not everyone was impressed. From the shadows near the balcony, a man stepped forward. He was tall, dressed in a stark white suit that contrasted sharply with his pale skin. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes were a terrifying, piercing gold. He was Roman, the leader of the brutal downtown faction, and Dominic's most bitter rival. "A blood debt," Roman sneered, his voice dripping with venomous amusement. He walked slowly toward them, his golden eyes locked hungrily on Natalie's exposed neck. "How quaint, Katerina, holding on to mortal superstitions. She smells exquisite, I will admit, but bringing a fragile little blood bag into our sacred halls, it's an insult to the purity of our kind." Dominic shifted smoothly, placing his body entirely between Natalie and Roman. The air in the ballroom cracked with sudden, violent pressure. "Take one more step toward her, Roman," Dominic whispered, his voice echoing with absolute terrifying lethality, "and I will show you exactly how pure my violence can be." Roman paused, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You claim her as a ward, Dominic, but I hear the erratic beating of her heart. I smell the flush of her skin. She isn't just a ward to you, she's a weakness." Before Dominic could unleash the beast roaring inside him, Natalie stepped out from behind him. She didn't know where the courage came from, perhaps from her grandmother Rosa, perhaps from the intoxicating proximity of the vampire king beside her. She looked Roman dead in his golden eyes. "I suggest you back away, Roman," Natalie said, her voice clear and ringing through the silent ballroom. "I may be mortal, but I am standing next to the king, and from where I am standing you look like nothing more than a peasant begging for scraps." The ballroom erupted into a deafening silence. Roman's face twisted in absolute fury. Dominic didn't look at Roman. He looked down at Natalie, a slow, predatory, and fiercely proud smile spreading across his lips. In that moment, surrounded by the most dangerous creatures on Earth, Natalie realized she wasn't just surviving the shadows, she was learning how to rule them. The silence in the grand ballroom was so absolute, so heavy, it felt as though all oxygen had been instantly vaporized. Roman's golden eyes widened, the pupils contracting into sharp reptilian slits. His flawless, marble-like features contorted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. For a fragile human to speak to an ancient faction leader with such blatant disrespect was unthinkable. It was a death sentence. A low, guttural hiss vibrated from Roman's chest, a sound that bypassed the ears and rattled the teeth of every being in the room. He took a sudden, aggressive step forward, his hands curling into fists tight enough to crush solid granite. Before his foot even touched the polished marble floor, Dominic moved. It wasn't a step, it was a violent displacement of reality. Dominic's hand clamped around Roman's throat with the force of an industrial vice. The sheer kinetic impact sent a shockwave through the room, rattling the thousands of baccarat crystals in the chandeliers above. Dominic lifted the towering faction leader effortlessly, slamming him backward into a colossal, load-bearing pillar. The ancient stone cracked spiderwebs in every direction under the crushing weight. "I warned you!" Dominic snarled, his voice no longer human, but a demonic, echoing roar that shook the very foundations of the estate. His fangs were fully descended, gleaming wetly in the dim light, and the veins beneath his eyes pulsed with a terrifying, luminescent black ichor. "You look at her again, and I will rip your head from your shoulders and mount it on the gates of this estate. Nod if you understand me, Roman. Roman gasped, his hands clawing desperately at Dominic's immaculate velvet sleeve, unable to break the iron grip. Humiliated in front of the five families, the golden-eyed vampire gave a stiff, jerky nod. Dominic threw him aside with disgust. Roman crashed to the floor, his pristine white Tom Ford suit ruined with dust and debris. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, shooting a look of venomous, eternal hatred at Natalie, before turning and storming out of the ballroom, his sycophants scrambling nervously behind him. The string quartet, trembling visibly, immediately resumed their melancholy waltz. At a sharp glare from Katerina, the tension slowly bled out of the room, replaced by a feverish whispered gossip. The apex predators of New York had just learned a vital lesson. The mortal girl was not just a ward. She was Dominic Moretti's greatest obsession. Dominic turned back to Natalie. The demonic visage vanished instantly, replaced by the breathtakingly handsome billionaire, though his chest still heaved with suppressed violence. Without a word, he grabbed her hand, his grip gentle but absolutely unyielding, and pulled her away from the staring crowd, leading her up a hidden spiral staircase that bypassed the main gallery. He didn't stop until they reached a secluded open-air balcony overlooking the sprawling, ink-black forests of the Hudson Valley. The freezing rain had stopped, leaving a heavy, haunting mist lingering over the grounds. Dominic released her hand and paced the length of the stone balcony like a caged panther. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the cool composure he was famous for completely shattered. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Dominic demanded, spinning to face her. His voice was a harsh rasp, fraught with an emotion Natalie had never heard from him before, raw, unfiltered panic. "Roman is a sadist. He controls the shipping ports from Brooklyn to Boston. He has slaughtered entire covens for a fraction of the insult you just dealt him." Natalie stood her ground, the adrenaline still singing in her veins. The plunging blood-red silk of her dress caught the moonlight, making her look like a dark, magnificent queen against the stone backdrop. "He was disrespecting you. He was disrespecting your mother. I wasn't going to stand there and let him treat me like a piece of meat to humiliate your family." Dominic stopped pacing. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling. The anger in his dark eyes slowly morphed into something far more dangerous. It was an all-consuming, terrifying hunger. He crossed the balcony in two long strides, backing her up until her spine pressed against the cold stone balustrade. He placed his hands on the railing on either side of her, trapping her in his icy, intoxicating orbit. The scent of bergamot rain and ancient power wrapped around her like a drug. "You are so incredibly fragile," Dominic whispered, leaning in until his lips were mere inches from hers. She could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his skin, yet her own body was on fire. One flick of his wrist, and your neck would snap. And yet, you stood between a 600-year-old monster and his prey to protect my pride. I wasn't thinking," Natalie breathed, her heart hammering frantically against her ribs. She looked up into his eyes, watching the crimson glow pulse softly in the depths of his pupils. "I just knew I couldn't let him win." Dominic slowly raised a hand, his cold, pale fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, sliding down to rest against the frantic pulse point at her throat. He closed his eyes, savoring the rhythm of her racing heart, as if it were a symphony written exclusively for him. "You are going to drive me to madness, Natalie," he murmured, his voice thick with a desperate, agonizing desire. "I have spent 5 centuries mastering control, and you dismantle it with a single breath." He leaned closer, his lips brushing softly against the shell of her ear. "Do not ever put yourself in danger again, because if anyone ever harms you, I will not just kill them. I will burn the mortal and immortal worlds to ash until there is nothing left but you and me." While Dominic made his vow on the high balcony 40 miles south, in a lavish penthouse in Tribeca, Roman was destroying everything in sight. Priceless Ming vases shattered against the walls. A massive flat-screen television was reduced to sparkling dust. Roman tore through his luxurious apartment blind with rage until his second-in-command, a ruthless vampire named Victor, stepped tentatively into the room. "Sir," Victor said carefully, keeping his distance. "The Moretti estate is heavily fortified. We cannot strike back directly. Katerina has the European elders on her side. If we move against the girl there, it is a suicide mission." Roman paused, panting heavily. He wiped a streak of dust from his ruined white suit, his golden eyes glowing with a sick, brilliant malice. "I am not a fool, Victor. I will not march an army to Katerina's gates. Dominic thinks he has outsmarted me by hiding the girl behind his walls." Roman walked over to a shattered glass table and picked up a sleek black tablet. He tapped the screen, pulling up a deeply encrypted surveillance file. Dominic forgot the first rule of warfare. Roman sneered, turning the tablet to show Victor. On the screen was live security footage of a lavish, state-of-the-art hospital room. A young man looking exhausted and sickly was sleeping in the bed. "Every fortress has a back door, and every human has a weakness," Roman purred. Dominic placed her brother Leo in the Clearview Luxury Recovery Center in Connecticut. "He has a dozen vampire guards watching the perimeter, but vampires cannot walk in the sunlight." Roman smiled, a terrifying, predatory grin. "Contact Detective Miller at the NYPD. Tell our corrupt human friends they have a daytime extraction mission. We are taking the brother. Let us see how brave the little bird is when her family is bleeding on my floor." 3 days passed, in a deceptive, velvet-lined peace. Natalie's life at the Moretti estate settled into a strange, intoxicating routine. She spent her afternoons in the vast, multi-level library, surrounded by first-edition novels and ancient grimoires, reading while the immortal guards slept through the sunlit hours. Her relationship with Dominic had shifted fundamentally since the night of the ball. The invisible barrier between them had shattered. He no longer stood in the doorway of her suite. He sat beside her by the roaring fireplaces. They drank heavily, aged Macallan, 25, or rather Natalie drank the whiskey, while Dominic watched her with a heavy, unblinking devotion. He taught her the history of the world, not found in textbooks recounting the rise and fall of empires he had witnessed firsthand. Natalie found herself falling deeply and terrifyingly for the apex predator. She loved the way his cold skin warmed slightly when he held her hand. She loved the rare, devastating smile that transformed his ruthless face into something devastatingly beautiful. She was no longer a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was the queen of the dark castle. But the illusion of safety was a fragile glass about to shatter. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was a bruised, heavy purple, threatening a severe thunderstorm. Dominic was asleep in the catacombs beneath the manor, his unnatural body requiring the restorative dark of the earth during the peak daylight hours. Natalie was sitting in her suite when a soft knock interrupted the quiet. A human maid named Brenda entered. Brenda was one of the few mortal servants allowed on the upper floors, a middle-aged woman whose family had served the Morettis for 3 generations. She carried a large, pristine white box bearing the logo of Bergdorf Goodman. "A delivery for you, Miss Natalie," Brenda said. Her voice was unusually tight, her eyes darting nervously toward the window. "Thank you, Brenda. You can just leave it on the bed," Natalie replied with a warm smile, bookmarking her novel. Brenda set the box down, hesitated for an agonizing second, and then practically bolted from the room. Frowning, Natalie walked over to the bed and untied the thick black ribbon. She lifted the lid, expecting to find another exquisite silk gown curated by Valentina. Instead, resting on a bed of black tissue paper, was a cheap plastic burner phone. Beside it lay a lock of dark, curly hair. Natalie's blood ran completely cold. The breath hitched violently in her throat. She recognized that curl. It belonged to Leo. Suddenly, the burner phone buzzed, vibrating violently against the cardboard. Natalie's hands shook as she picked it up and hit the green button. She didn't speak. She couldn't. "Such a quiet little bird," Roman's smooth, venomous voice purred through the speaker. "Where is he?" Natalie whispered, her voice cracking with terror. "Dominic put him under 24-hour guard. If you touched him—" "Dominic's guards are creatures of the night, my dear," Roman interrupted with a cruel chuckle. "They are quite useless at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when human mercenaries disguised as federal agents walk into a rehab center. Your brother is with me now, and I must say he is not handling the withdrawal very well." A muffled, agonizing scream echoed through the phone. It was Leo. "Stop, please," Natalie begged, tears immediately spilling over her cheeks. "What do you want? Take me. Leave him alone." "Exactly," Roman said, his voice dropping, all pretense of amusement becoming sharp and lethal. "You insulted me in front of the syndicate. You undermined my authority. I want Dominic to feel the exact same humiliation. I want him to know that all his power, all his wealth couldn't keep his prized possession safe." Tell me what to do, Natalie said, her voice dropping to a dead, hollow register. There is an abandoned shipping warehouse at Pier 41 in Red Hook, Brooklyn, Roman instructed. You have exactly 2 hours to get there. You will come alone. If you alert Dominic, if I see even a shadow of a Moretti guard within 10 miles of the pier, I will drain your brother dry and mail him to you in pieces. Do we have an understanding? Yes, Natalie choked out. Tick-tock, little bird, Roman whispered, and the line went dead. Panic threatened to drown her. Her chest heaved as she frantically paced the room. She had to wake Dominic. She had to tell Katerina. But Roman's threat echoed in her skull. I will drain him dry. Roman had the daytime advantage. If she triggered the estate's alarms, Roman's human accomplices would execute Leo before Dominic could even cross the city limits. She had to do this alone. She had to trade her life for Leo's. Natalie moved with desperate, frantic efficiency. She stripped off her expensive silk loungewear and pulled on dark jeans, a thick black turtleneck, and a pair of heavy boots she had brought from her old apartment. She grabbed a heavy silver letter opener from the antique mahogany desk and shoved it into her boot, a pathetic weapon against a vampire, but it was all she had. Getting out of the estate was a suicide mission in itself. The perimeter was guarded by Valentina's elite sentries, but Natalie had spent the last week studying the layout. She knew that at 4 p.m. the shift changed at the subterranean garage where the human staff kept their vehicles. She slipped out of her suite, navigating the cavernous, shadowy halls of the East Wing. She avoided the main staircase, taking the narrow servant corridors that wound through the walls like arteries. Her heart pounded so loudly she was terrified an immortal ear would pick up the rhythm. She reached the underground garage just as the storm broke outside, thunder masking the sound of her footsteps. A catering van was idling near the exit, the human driver stepping out to sign a clipboard held by an imposing sunglass-wearing immortal guard. Natalie didn't hesitate. She crept behind a row of luxury SUVs, waiting for the guard to turn his head to check the manifest. In that split second, she darted into the back of the catering van, pulling the heavy metal door shut just as the engine revved. She huddled in the darkness among crates of imported truffles and caviar, wrapping her arms around her knees as the van rolled past the iron gates of the Moretti fortress. She was leaving the absolute safety of the Vampire King to walk straight into the jaws of a monster. As the van sped down the highway toward the crumbling docks of Brooklyn, Natalie looked out the small, tinted window at the torrential rain. She prayed Dominic would forgive her. She prayed he wouldn't destroy the city, searching for her. And most of all, she prayed that her grandmother's ancient bloodline had enough strength left to survive the night. The catering van slowed to a stop near the desolate industrial edge of Red Hook, Brooklyn. Natalie waited until she heard the human driver exit the cab, shouting over the roaring thunder to talk to a warehouse worker. Slipping out of the rear doors, she tumbled into the freezing rain, her boots splashing into deep puddles of oil-slicked water. Pier 41 loomed ahead, a rusted iron skeletal structure jutting out into the black, churning waters of the East River. It looked like a graveyard for dead ships. She ran, keeping low against the corrugated metal walls, her heart a frantic, trapped bird in her chest. The silver letter opener hidden in her boot pressed uncomfortably against her ankle, a laughably inadequate defense against a century-old vampire. But it was the only anchor she had to her own agency. She reached a rotting wooden door, hanging loosely from its hinges, and slipped into the cavernous interior of the warehouse. The air inside smelled of stagnant salt water, decaying timber, and a sharp metallic tang that made the hairs on her arms stand up, the unmistakable scent of blood. "Leo," she called out, her voice swallowed by the vast, echoing space and the rhythmic drumming of the storm against the corrugated roof. "You are late, little bird," a smooth, cultured voice purred from the gloom. A floodlight snapped on, blinding her. Natalie shielded her eyes, squinting through the harsh glare. In the center of a cleared space sat her brother Leo, tied to a heavy iron chair. He looked terrible. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, and his body shook violently with the agonizing tremors of forced drug withdrawal. A thick leather strap was buckled across his chest, and sitting casually on the shipping crate beside him was Roman. The faction leader still wore a tailored suit, though it was midnight black this time, matching the malice burning in his golden eyes. Two heavily armed human mercenaries stood flanking him, their assault rifles trained on the entrance. "Natalie," Leo choked out, his voice cracked and weak. "Natalie, run! He's not human!" "Oh God, he's not human." "Shut up, boy," Roman whispered softly, not even looking at him. He slid off the crate, walking with feline grace toward Natalie. "I must admit, I doubted you would have the courage to come alone. I thought for sure you would crawl to Dominic's coffin, crying for the king to save his favorite pet." "I kept my end of the deal," Natalie said, her voice shaking but resolute as she took a step toward her brother. "Let him go, Roman. You wanted me. You wanted to humiliate Dominic. You've done it. Let my brother go." Roman laughed, a sharp barking sound that echoed mockingly in the rafters. "Let him go and miss the look on Dominic's face when he realizes he lost everything in a single afternoon. No, my dear, the boy is my leverage, and you are my masterpiece." He closed the distance between them in a fraction of a second, his porcelain hand shooting out to grip her hair, forcing her head back. Natalie gasped, staring up into the terrifying golden abyss of his eyes. "Dominic thinks he can claim a human bloodline as his sacred property. He thinks the Moretti name makes him untouchable. But when he finds your drained, lifeless body dumped on his doorstep, he will understand that the crown he wears is made of nothing but dust. He will kill you," Natalie hissed through her teeth, refusing to beg. "He will tear you apart." "He won't have the chance," Roman sneered, his fangs slowly extending, gleaming like ivory needles under the harsh floodlight. "By the time the sun fully sets and he awakens from his pathetic daylight slumber, you will already be ours. I am not just going to kill you, Natalie. I am going to turn you. I will infect your precious Corelli blood with my own venom. I will make you my child, my puppet bound to my absolute will. Imagine the exquisite agony Dominic will suffer when he is forced to execute his beloved queen because she belongs to me." Natalie's mind screamed in horror. She reached down toward her boot, her fingers desperately groping for the silver letter opener. But Roman anticipated the movement. With a cruel chuckle, he backhanded her across the face. The force of the blow sent her flying across the concrete floor. She crashed into a stack of wooden pallets, the sharp pain exploding in her shoulder as the taste of copper filled her mouth. "Natalie!" Leo shrieked, struggling uselessly against his leather bonds. Roman walked slowly toward her, savoring her terror. He crouched beside her, his fingers wrapping around her throat, cutting off her air. Natalie clawed at his wrists, her lungs burning the darkness, closing in at the edges of her vision. The storm outside seemed to reach a deafening crescendo thunder, shaking the very earth beneath them. "Look at the sky, little bird," Roman whispered maliciously, pointing toward the dirty skylights above. The last remnants of twilight were fading, swallowed by an unnatural, suffocating darkness that did not belong to the storm. "The sun is officially gone. Your time is up." But as Roman leaned down to tear into her throat, the massive steel doors of the warehouse exploded inward with an absolutely apocalyptic, terrifyingly deafening and destructive force. The pressure in the room vanished, replaced by an absolute freezing vacuum. The torrential rain outside seemed to freeze mid-air as Dominic Moretti stepped through the smoking ruin of the entrance. He did not look like a man. He was a god of pure, unadulterated slaughter. The charcoal Brioni suit he wore was stark against the pale, glowing white of his skin. Shadows stretched and twisted from his boots like living tendrils, crawling up the walls and snuffing out the harsh floodlights until the entire warehouse was plunged into a suffocating, crimson-tinted twilight. His eyes were completely filled with a burning, blinding, blood-red light. The two mercenaries did not even have time to raise their rifles. Dominic moved past them like a lethal wind. A sickening crunch echoed through the rafters, and they hit the ground dead. Roman leapt backward, dragging Natalie up by her hair and pulling her tightly against his chest as a human shield. He pressed a long, jagged silver blade against her throat. "Stay back, Dominic!" Roman shrieked, his previous arrogance completely replaced by the frantic, high-pitched terror of a cornered rat. "One step closer, and I open her vein. I'll drain her before you can cross the floor." Dominic stopped 20 feet away. He did not breathe. The air around him was so cold that Natalie's exhaled breath plumed like smoke. The shadows behind him rose up like a towering wall of wings. You believe you can bargain with me using what is mine. Dominic's voice was not a voice anymore. It was an ancient echoing chorus of 1,000 dead kings. It vibrated through the concrete floor, fracturing the foundation beneath Roman's feet. You have broken the only law that kept your faction alive, Roman. You touched her. I will kill her. Roman roared, his hand trembling as the silver blade nicked the skin of Natalie's neck. A single bead of ruby blood welled up. The sight of her blood broke the last vestige of Dominic's control. The shadows surged forward, but Natalie did not wait to be saved. Guided by the fierce survival instinct of the Corelli bloodline, her hand shot down to her boot, her fingers wrapped around the heavy silver letter opener. With every ounce of strength she possessed, she drove the silver blade backward, plunging it deeply into Roman's thigh. Roman screamed an agonizing supernatural howl of pain as the silver burned through his ancient flesh. His grip loosened for a split second. That second was all Dominic needed. Dominic crossed the distance instantly. He ripped Natalie from Roman's grasp, spinning her safely behind his back. In the same fluid motion, Dominic's hand buried itself into Roman's chest. The sound of tearing fabric and crushing bone echoed through the empty warehouse. Roman's golden eyes widened in absolute paralyzed horror as Dominic slowly withdrew his hand, holding Roman's still beating blackened heart. For the Corelli line, Dominic whispered coldly. He crushed the organ to dust in his fist. Roman slumped to the ground, his body instantly graying and turning to ash before he even hit the wet concrete. The suffocating pressure in the room evaporated. The shadows receded back into the corners, and the normal patter of the rain returned. Dominic turned around slowly, his chest heaving. The terrifying red glow in his eyes faded back to their deep, bottomless black. He looked down at Natalie, his features contorted with a mixture of profound fury and devastating relief. "You left," he whispered, his voice cracking with a terrifyingly human vulnerability. "You walked out of my fortress. You risked everything. He had Leo." Natalie sobbed, the adrenaline finally leaving her body as she collapsed forward. Dominic caught her before she could hit the floor. He pulled her tightly against his chest, burying his face in her dark hair, his strong arms trembling as he held her. "You foolish, brave little bird," he murmured fiercely. "I would have torn this entire city apart to find him for you. You never have to face the monsters alone again." Dominic snapped her brother's leather bonds effortlessly. Valentina and the Moretti guards materialized from the mist. "Take the boy to the mansion," Dominic ordered. "See to his recovery personally." As Leo was carried out safely, Natalie looked up at the Vampire King. The small cut on her neck was still bleeding slightly. Dominic stared at the red drop, his jaw clenching as he fought his primal hunger. Natalie reached up her fingers, gently tracing his cold cheekbone. "Fix it," she whispered softly. Dominic looked into her eyes, finding nothing but absolute, unconditional trust. He leaned down, his tongue gently sweeping over the small wound. The touch was electric, healing the cut instantly. But as he pulled back, Natalie leaned up and pressed her lips against his. She bit her own lips slightly, offering him the taste of her ancient blood. Dominic groaned, a low, possessive sound, as he accepted the offering, drinking deep of her devotion while infusing her with his own immortal essence. The ancient pact was no longer just a piece of history or a debt written on paper. It was sealed in blood darkness and an eternal, unyielding love. Natalie was no longer just a helpless, terrified human hiding away in the cold shadows. She was now the true, ultimate queen of the Velvet Night, standing proudly and eternally beside her magnificent, immortal king. And that is how a spilled glass of wine transformed a struggling waitress into the reigning queen of New York's immortal underworld. Natalie and Dominic's love story proves that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who will protect you the most fiercely. What did you think of this epic vampire romance and their ancient blood pact? Would you trade your mortal life for an eternity with a billionaire vampire king? Let me know in the comments. If you loved this story, please smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling romances.